I woke up from surgery alone. The nurse said, "Your children left. They said the parking was too expensive." I started sobbing. Suddenly, a tall man in a suit walked in and gently held my hand. "Mrs. Davis? You don't remember me, but you paid for my lunch every day in 3rd grade." He wasn't just a visitor. He was the owner of the hospital. What he did next changed everything. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. The fluorescent lights above my hospital bed hummed with that cold, mechanical sound that makes you feel more alone than you already are. I blinked slowly, my throat dry as sandpaper, trying to focus on the clock mounted on the sterile white wall. 3:27 in the afternoon. The anesthesia was still making everything feel fuzzy around the edges, but one thing was crystal clear: the silence. My name is Adrienne Davis, and I'm 64 years old. 3 hours ago, I had undergone what my cardiologist called a routine procedure to clear a blocked artery. Nothing too serious, he'd assured me, but at my age, any surgery involving the heart carries risks. I'd asked my 3 children to be here when I woke up. David, my oldest at 38, had promised he'd take the day off from his accounting firm. Sarah, 35 and between jobs again, said she'd bring flowers. Michael, my baby at 32, had rolled his eyes but agreed to come after his sales calls. The room smelled like industrial disinfectant and something else I couldn't quite place. Fear, maybe, or disappointment. The machines beside my bed beeped steadily, monitoring my heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen levels, everything the doctors needed to know about how my body was functioning. But no machine could measure the hollow ache spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with the surgery. I turned my head toward the window, wincing at the sharp pain in my neck from the IV line. Outside, the Seattle sky was its usual gray, threatening rain that might or might not come. Cars moved through the hospital parking lot below, people going about their lives, visiting their loved ones. Where were mine? "Mrs. Davis?" A voice broke through my fog of confusion and growing panic. I turned to see a young nurse with kind eyes and strawberry blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. Her scrubs were covered in cheerful cartoon cats, which seemed absurdly optimistic in this sterile environment. "Yes?" My voice came out as barely a whisper, my throat still raw from the breathing tube. She approached my bed with a gentle smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "How are you feeling? Any pain? Nausea?" I shook my head slightly. Where? Where are my children? Did they leave a message?" The nurse's smile faltered. She glanced at her tablet, then back at me with obvious discomfort. "Well, they were here earlier, during your surgery, in the waiting room. And now?" She hesitated, and in that pause, I felt my heart rate monitor start beeping faster. "They left about an hour ago," the gentleman at the front desk said. She paused again, clearly struggling with how to phrase this delicately. "Just tell me." My voice was stronger now, though my hands were starting to shake. "He said they mentioned the parking fees were getting too expensive and they'd check on you later." The words hit me like a physical blow. Parking fees. Too expensive. I stared at her, certain I'd misunderstood. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" The nurse's cheeks flushed pink. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Davis. I probably shouldn't have. I mean, I'm sure they'll be back soon. People sometimes need to take care of things, you know? Get some air, grab something to eat." But her voice was trailing off because we both knew she was making excuses for the inexcusable. My children, the 3 people I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for over the years, had left me alone after heart surgery because they didn't want to pay for parking. The tears came suddenly, without warning. Not the gentle, dignified tears of a woman my age, but the raw, choking sobs of someone whose heart was breaking in ways that had nothing to do with blocked arteries. The nurse reached for the tissue box on my bedside table, her face creased with sympathy and embarrassment. "Mrs. Davis, please don't upset yourself. Your heart needs to rest right now. Can I call someone else for you? Another family member?" A friend? I couldn't speak, couldn't stop crying, couldn't process the fact that I was 64 years old, lying in a hospital bed after surgery, and my own children had abandoned me over parking fees that couldn't have been more than $20 or $30 for the day. Through my tears, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, confident footsteps that paused at my doorway. The nurse looked up, and her expression shifted to professional attention. "Excuse me," a deep, gentle voice said. "Is this Mrs. Adrienne Davis?" I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, trying to compose myself enough to see who was speaking. A tall man in an expensive dark suit stood in the doorway. He was probably in his mid-50s, with salt and pepper hair and kind brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Everything about him suggested success and authority, from his perfectly tailored jacket to his leather briefcase. The nurse straightened up. "Yes, but visiting hours?" "It's all right," he said quietly, stepping into the room. His presence somehow filled the space without being overwhelming. "Mrs. Davis, my name is Malcolm Chen. You don't remember me, but—" He paused, his voice catching slightly. "You paid for my lunch every day in 3rd grade." I stared at him, confusion cutting through my emotional turmoil. 3rd grade? That would have been. When I was 16, working as a teacher's aide at Franklin Elementary to earn extra money for my family. But I couldn't place him, couldn't remember. He seemed to understand my confusion and stepped closer to my bed, his hands clasped respectfully in front of him. "Mrs. Davis, you probably helped so many children over the years that you don't remember them all. But I remember you. You saved my life." The nurse glanced between us uncertainly. "Sir, if you're not immediate family—" "Actually," Malcolm said, his voice taking on a different tone, more authoritative but still gentle, "I own this hospital." My tears stopped abruptly. I blinked hard, certain the anesthesia was making me hallucinate. "You? What?" The nurse's eyes widened, and she quickly excused herself, mumbling something about checking on other patients. Malcolm watched her go, then turned back to me with a small, sad smile. "May I sit down?" he asked, gesturing to the chair beside my bed. I nodded, unable to find my voice. He sat down carefully, setting his briefcase on the floor, and for a moment just looked at me with those kind eyes that seemed familiar now, though I couldn't place them in a child's face from decades ago. "I've been looking for you for years," he said quietly. "Ever since I finished medical school and started building my career. I always wondered what happened to the teacher's aide who made sure a hungry little boy didn't go without lunch." My heart monitor was beeping faster again, but this time it wasn't from distress. It was from a strange mixture of confusion, hope, and something I couldn't quite identify. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Malcolm? Chen? I'm sorry, I can't remember." "You wouldn't," he said gently. "I was just one of many kids you helped, and back then, my name was Malcolm Peterson. I was adopted by the Chen family when I was 12. He paused, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Mrs. Davis, do you remember a boy who never had lunch money? Who was so thin his clothes never fit right? Who sat alone in the cafeteria watching other kids eat?" Slowly, like fog lifting from my memory, an image began to form. A small boy with dark hair that never seemed to be cut right. Large brown eyes and a too thin face. Clothes that were always a little too big, a little too worn. And lunch times when he would just sit at the table pretending he wasn't hungry. "Oh my God," I breathed. "Malcolm, little Malcolm, you were so quiet, so—" "Hungry," he finished gently. "Every day. My biological parents. Well, that's not important now. What's important is that you noticed. You saw a kid who was falling through the cracks, and you did something about it." The memory was coming back clearer now. I had been working at Franklin Elementary to supplement my family's income. Even at 16, I was already helping my parents pay bills, already learning what it meant to sacrifice for the people you love. I'd noticed Malcolm because he reminded me of myself, trying to be invisible, trying not to be a burden. You never asked questions, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. You never made me feel like charity. You found a way to make sure I had lunch every day, for 2 whole years. I remembered now, the way I'd slip extra lunch tickets to him, how I'd tell him the cafeteria had made too much and needed someone to help eat the leftovers. The way his face would light up when I'd hand him a tray of food, like I'd given him the world. Malcolm, I said, fresh tears starting to fall. You were just a baby. You were so thin. He reached out and gently took my hand, and the warmth of human contact after hours of cold abandonment nearly broke me all over again. Mrs. Davis, he said softly. When I woke up this morning, I had no idea this would be the day I'd finally get to thank you. When my assistant told me there was an Adrienne Davis having surgery here, I had to come see if it was really you. I squeezed his hand. This successful man who had once been a hungry little boy I'd tried to help. I can't believe. Look at you. You became a doctor. You own a hospital. Because of you, he said simply. Because someone showed me that kindness existed in the world, that I was worth caring about. We sat in silence for a moment, his hand warm in mine, the steady beeping of the machines marking time. Outside, the Seattle sky was growing darker, but somehow the room felt brighter than it had all day. Mrs. Davis, Malcolm said carefully, I noticed you were alone when I came in. Is there no one here with you? And just like that, the pain came flooding back. The reality of my situation crashed over me again, made even more stark by this unexpected kindness from a stranger who wasn't really a stranger at all. My children, I said, my voice breaking. They left. They said the parking was too expensive. Malcolm's grip on my hand tightened, and I saw something flash across his face. Anger, maybe, or disbelief. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. I see, he said quietly. Well then, it's a good thing I'm here. Because, Mrs. Davis, I made a promise to myself a long time ago. If I ever found the woman who saved that hungry little boy, I was going to make sure she was never alone when she needed someone. Malcolm stayed with me until the evening shift change, and for the first time since waking up, I didn't feel abandoned. He'd insisted on having the kitchen send up dinner for both of us. Real food, not the standard hospital fare. We ate slowly, carefully, as he told me about his journey from that hungry third grader to the man sitting beside my hospital bed. After the Chens adopted me, he said, cutting his salmon into precise pieces, everything changed. They gave me stability, education, love, but I never forgot those 2 years at Franklin Elementary. I never forgot being hungry, and I never forgot the teacher's aide who made sure I wasn't. I picked at my own meal, still overwhelmed by the day's events. I just did what anyone would do. No, Malcolm said firmly, setting down his fork. That's not true, and we both know it. Mrs. Davis, may I call you Adrienne? I nodded, suddenly feeling shy. This accomplished man was treating me with more respect and care than my own children had shown. Adrienne, do you remember how you paid for those lunches? I frowned, thinking back. I had my teacher's aide salary. It wasn't much, but... $3 a day, he said quietly. That's what school lunch cost back in 1975. You were making about $200 a month as a teacher's aide. Do you know what that $3 a day meant? I shook my head, though something uncomfortable was stirring in my memory. It meant you were spending almost half your paycheck feeding me. A kid you barely knew, a kid whose own parents couldn't be bothered to provide for. The memory hit me like a physical blow. I had forgotten, or maybe I'd forced myself to forget, how tight money had been back then. I was 16, trying to help my own family pay rent. And yes, I'd been spending almost half my earnings on lunch for a boy who reminded me too much of myself. I'd eaten peanut butter sandwiches for lunch for 2 years so Malcolm could have hot meals. I remember now, I whispered. I remember being hungry too. But you were so little, and you looked so lost, he finished. I was lost, Adrian. And you found me. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out something that made my heart skip. It was a yellowed lunch card from Franklin Elementary, the kind they used to punch holes in when you bought a meal. This one was worn soft from handling, the edges frayed. I kept this, he said, holding it carefully. All these years. It's the last lunch card you gave me before the school year ended, before I never saw you again. I took the card with trembling fingers, remembering the texture of them, the way they'd smell faintly of the cafeteria's industrial food. Why? Why did you keep this? Because it represented hope, he said simply. When the world seemed dark and I felt like nobody cared if I lived or died, I'd look at that card and remember that someone had noticed me. Someone had thought I was worth feeding. Tears were threatening again, but these felt different, cleaner somehow. Malcolm, I had no idea. I just saw a hungry child and you acted, without hesitation, without expecting anything in return. He leaned forward slightly. Do you know what I did with that lesson? I shook my head. I became a doctor because I wanted to help people the way you helped me. I specialized in pediatrics first, then moved into hospital administration so I could help on a larger scale. And every business decision I've made, every policy I've implemented in my hospitals, has been guided by one question: what would Adrian do? The weight of his words settled over me. This successful man, this owner of multiple hospitals, had been carrying my influence with him for decades. While I'd been struggling to raise my own children, working multiple jobs and barely making ends meet, my simple act of kindness had been growing into something I never could have imagined. I built my first clinic in a low-income neighborhood, Malcolm continued. Free lunch program for kids whose families couldn't afford it. Then I expanded to full medical services. Now I own 4 hospitals across the Pacific Northwest, and every single one has a program to make sure no child goes hungry while they're getting treatment. I stared at him, overwhelmed. Because of school lunches? Because of you, he corrected gently. Because you taught a little boy that kindness exists, even when the world feels cruel. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the hospital's evening sounds settling around us. Somewhere down the hall, a baby was crying. Elevator bells chimed softly. Normal sounds of life continuing, people being cared for. Malcolm, I said finally, can I ask you something? Anything. How did you find me? I mean today. After all these years, how did you know I was here? His expression grew slightly more serious. I've had a standing request with several private investigation firms for the past 15 years. Any time an Adrian Davis of the right age appeared in public records in the Pacific Northwest, they'd notify me. When you registered for surgery here, it triggered an alert. You've been looking for me for 15 years? Longer, actually. But I had the resources to really search for the past 15. He paused, studying my face carefully. Adrian, I know this might sound invasive, but I've learned quite a bit about your life. I wanted to make sure I'd found the right person before I approached you. A chill ran down my spine. What kind of things? Malcolm's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I know you've had a difficult life. 3 children, divorced when they were young. You worked multiple jobs to support them, cleaning offices at night, substitute teaching during the day, weekend shifts at a grocery store. Each detail hit me like a small fist to the chest. My life laid out so simply, so starkly. All those years of exhaustion and struggle, summed up in a few sentences. I know you've been living on a fixed income since you retired, he continued, his voice gentle but his eyes growing harder. Social Security and a small pension from the school district, about $1,200 a month. I nodded, embarrassed. It wasn't much, but it was enough for my small apartment and basic needs. Barely enough, but enough. And I know, Malcolm said, his voice dropping lower, that despite having so little, You've been helping your children financially for years. David's accounting practice that nearly failed 5 years ago. You took out a loan against your pension to help him. Sarah's credit card debt from when she was unemployed for 8 months. You've been making minimum payments. Michael's car down payment last year. That was your money, too. My cheeks burned with shame. How did he know all this? And why did hearing it spoken aloud make it sound so pathetic? How do you... Financial records are fairly easy to trace when you know what you're looking for, he said, not unkindly. Adrienne, I'm not judging you. I understand the instinct to help your children, but I've also learned some other things. The way he said it made my stomach clench. What other things? Malcolm was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing his words. When he spoke, his voice was careful, controlled. I know that none of your children have been to visit you in the past 6 months before today. I know that David hasn't returned your calls from last month when you were having chest pains. I know that Sarah borrowed $2,000 from you in December and hasn't spoken to you since. Each fact was like a small cut, precise and painful. I wanted to defend my children, to explain that they were busy, that they had their own lives, that I understood, but the words wouldn't come. And I know, Malcolm said, his voice growing softer with sympathy, that when you called each of them to tell them about today's surgery, you had to leave voicemails. None of them called you back until this morning. The tears came again, but this time they felt different. Not just sadness, but a deep, bone-tired recognition of truths I'd been avoiding for years. They're busy, I whispered, the same excuse I'd been making to myself for so long. They have their own families, their own problems. Adrienne, Malcolm said gently. When I was 8 years old and the Chens adopted me, I made a promise to myself. I promised that if I ever had the chance to repay your kindness, I would. But I also promised that I would never let anyone treat someone the way my biological parents treated me. He leaned forward, his eyes intense but kind. I've been watching your children's behavior patterns for months now, ever since I confirmed you were the Adrienne Davis I was looking for, and what I've seen. He paused, clearly struggling with how much to say. What I've seen concerns me deeply. My heart was racing now, the monitor beside my bed beeping faster. What do you mean? Malcolm reached into his briefcase again and pulled out a manila folder. He hesitated, holding it in his hands. Adrienne, I want you to know that everything I'm about to tell you comes from a place of caring. I owe you my life, and I won't stand by and watch people take advantage of your kindness the way mine was taken advantage of. He opened the folder, and I could see papers inside, documents with official letterheads. 3 weeks ago, he said carefully, David made an appointment with an elder care attorney. Sarah has been researching nursing homes in your area, and Michael has been asking friends about the process for getting someone declared mentally incompetent. The world seemed to tilt sideways. I gripped the bed rail, certain I was going to be sick. That can't be right, I breathed. They wouldn't. They're my children. They love me. Malcolm's expression was infinitely gentle, but his words cut deep. I'm sure they do, in their own way. But Adrienne, I think there are some things about your children's finances and their plans that you need to know. The folder in Malcolm's hand seemed to grow heavier as the seconds passed. I stared at it, part of me wanting to snatch it away and throw it across the room, and part of me needing to know the truth, no matter how much it might hurt. Maybe I shouldn't show you this while you're recovering, Malcolm said, noticing my distress. The monitors beside my bed were beeping more rapidly now, reflecting my elevated heart rate. No, I said firmly, surprising myself with the strength in my voice. I need to know. I've spent too many years making excuses for them, haven't I? Malcolm nodded slowly, then opened the folder. What I'm about to show you I didn't obtain illegally. It's all public record, or information that was shared with me by people who were concerned about the pattern they were seeing. He pulled out the first document, a printed email. This is from the elder care attorney David consulted. The attorney was uncomfortable with the consultation and reached out to me through mutual professional contacts. I took the paper with shaking hands. The email was addressed to someone named Patricia Henley, Elder Law Associates. My eyes scanned the text, but the words seemed to swim together until one paragraph jumped out at me. Mr. Davis inquired specifically about the timeline for declaring an elderly parent mentally incompetent, with particular interest in situations where the parent is too generous for their own good and making poor financial decisions that will affect the family's inheritance. The words hit me like a physical blow. I read the paragraph again, hoping I'd misunderstood, but the meaning was crystal clear. David hadn't been asking about getting help for a mother with dementia. He'd been asking how to legally take control of a mother who was giving away what he considered his money. The attorney, Malcolm continued gently, was concerned enough about the nature of the questions that she declined to take David as a client. That's why she reached out through professional channels. She wanted someone to know that there might be an elderly person at risk. I set the email down with trembling fingers. What else? Malcolm hesitated, then pulled out a second document. This is a printout of an online conversation between Sarah and a friend. The friend was so disturbed by what Sarah was saying that she screenshot it, and eventually it made its way to me. The messages were from Facebook, between Sarah and someone named Jennifer Moss. I recognized the name. Jennifer had been Sarah's college roommate. My eyes found Sarah's messages, each one feeling like a dagger to my heart. Mom is driving me crazy with her bleeding heart act. Do you know she gave $500 to some charity last month? $500! While I'm drowning in credit card debt. She's 64 and acting like she's going to live forever. Doesn't she realize that money should be going to her family? Jen, I swear, if she gives away much more, there won't be anything left for us when she's gone. David thinks we need to do something before she gets too old and starts getting scammed by everyone. We're looking into some options. There are ways to protect elderly people from themselves, if you know what I mean. I couldn't read anymore. The phone slipped from my hands and Malcolm caught it before it could fall to the floor. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that I felt numb. These weren't strangers talking about some vulnerable old woman. This was my daughter, the child I'd raised and sacrificed for, discussing me like I was a problem to be solved. There's more, Malcolm said quietly, but maybe, show me. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, flat and cold. Show me all of it. The next document was even worse. It was a credit report, my credit report. Someone had requested it recently, and the request had come from David's accounting firm. How did he get this? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. You gave him your social security number and other personal information when he helped you set up online banking last year, Malcolm said. He's been monitoring your finances without your knowledge. The credit report showed everything. My modest savings account with $3,400. My checking account that stayed around $200 most months. The small loan I'd taken against my pension to help David's business. The ongoing payments I was making on Sarah's credit card debt. Even the $50 monthly donation I made to the local animal shelter. But there was something else. A note in the margins, handwritten in David's precise accountant script. Unnecessary charitable giving, approximately $800 per year, could be redirected. He's been tracking my donations, I whispered. $50 a month to help abandoned animals, and he considers it unnecessary. Malcolm's jaw was tight with controlled anger. There's one more thing, Adrian. This one is the hardest to see, but I think you need to know. He pulled out his phone and showed me an audio file. This was recorded yesterday in the hospital parking lot after they left. The person who recorded it works security here. When he heard what they were saying, he felt obligated to document it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone, but Malcolm helped me steady it as he pressed play. The audio was slightly muffled, but I could clearly hear my children's voices. David's voice. Look, the procedure went fine. She's going to be fine. There's no point in us sitting around here all day paying $20 for parking. Sarah's voice. I just feel weird leaving her alone. Michael's voice with a laugh. She's been alone most of her life anyway. It's not like she's going to know the difference. David again. The important thing is that we've established we're concerned children who showed up. When the time comes to make decisions about her care, that's what matters. Sarah. When do you think that will be? David. Couple of years, maybe sooner if her health declines. The key is to start laying the groundwork now. Show a pattern of irresponsible spending. Get documentation of her making poor decisions. Michael. Like giving away money to strangers. David. Exactly. The animal shelter donations. The random acts of kindness she's always doing. We frame it as early dementia, confusion about finances. Sarah. But she's not confused. She's just generous. David. Generous with our inheritance. Look, Sarah, that house is worth $300,000. Her savings and pension add up to another $150,000, maybe more. Do you want to watch her give it all away to every sob story that comes along? Michael. David's right. We need to protect her from herself and protect our future. The recording continued for another minute, my children discussing me like a business problem, calculating my worth down to the dollar, planning how to take control of my life and my decisions. When it finally ended, the silence in the hospital room felt deafening. I stared at Malcolm's phone long after the audio stopped playing. In the space of an hour, I had discovered that the 3 people I loved most in the world saw me not as a mother, but as an obstacle to their financial security. Every act of kindness I'd ever shown, every dollar I'd donated to help others, was seen as theft from their future wealth. They think I'm losing my mind, I said finally, my voice barely audible. They're planning to have me declared incompetent because I give $50 a month to help animals. Adrienne, Malcolm said gently, there's something else. The reason they left today wasn't really about parking fees. I looked up at him, wondering what could possibly be worse than what I'd already learned. They went to meet with another attorney while you were in recovery. A different one. Someone who was more willing to help them explore their options. The appointment was scheduled for this afternoon. The full picture was becoming clear now. My children hadn't left because of parking fees. They'd left because they had a meeting about taking control of my life. While I was lying unconscious on an operating table, they were in some lawyer's office learning how to have me declared mentally incompetent. How long have you known about this? I asked. I started investigating 3 months ago when I confirmed you were the Adrienne Davis I'd been looking for. At first, I was just trying to understand your life, to see if there was a way I could quietly repay some of your kindness without disrupting your world. He paused, running a hand through his hair. But the more I learned about your children's behavior, the more concerned I became. The pattern was clear. They were isolating you, monitoring your finances, and laying groundwork to take control. Why didn't you contact me sooner? Malcolm's expression grew pained. Because I wasn't sure you'd believe me, and because I hoped I was wrong. I hoped that when you needed them most, like today, they would show their true character by being here for you. Instead, they showed their true character by leaving. Yes. I leaned back against my pillows, feeling exhausted beyond anything the surgery could have caused. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I felt like I was grieving the death of 3 people who had never really existed. The children I thought I had raised, the children I thought loved me, were figments of my imagination. The real David, Sarah, and Michael were strangers who saw me as nothing more than a bank account with an inconvenient conscience attached to it. Malcolm, I said after a long silence, what happens now? He leaned forward slightly, his expression serious but kind. That depends on what you want to happen. But Adrienne, I want you to know that you're not alone in this. I made a promise to myself about repaying your kindness, and I meant it. What kind of promise? The promise that if I ever found you, I would make sure you were protected, and cared for the way you protected and cared for me." His voice grew stronger, more determined. "Your children may see you as a problem to be managed, but I see you as the woman who saved my life. And I'll be damned if I'm going to let anyone treat you the way they're planning to treat you." For the first time since waking up from surgery, I felt something other than hurt and betrayal. I felt the faintest glimmer of hope. "What did you have in mind?" I asked. Malcolm smiled, and for just a moment, I could see the grateful little boy he'd once been. "Well," he said, reaching for his briefcase again, "it turns out that owning hospitals comes with certain advantages, and having good lawyers doesn't hurt either." He pulled out a different folder, this one thick with official-looking documents. "Adrienne, how would you feel about making some changes to your life? Changes that would ensure you're never at anyone's mercy again." I looked at the folder, then back at Malcolm's kind, determined face. Outside my window, the Seattle sky was growing dark, but somehow the room felt brighter than it had all day. "Tell me more," I said. Malcolm opened the new folder with the care of a surgeon handling a delicate instrument. Inside were documents that looked far more hopeful than the devastating evidence I'd just reviewed about my children's betrayal. "Adrienne," he began, his voice taking on a businesslike tone that somehow still managed to sound warm. "What I'm about to propose might seem overwhelming, but I want you to know that every suggestion I'm making comes from decades of planning. Ever since I started looking for you, I've been preparing for this conversation." I shifted slightly in my hospital bed, wincing as the IV tugged at my arm. "What kind of preparation?" He pulled out the first document, which looked like some sort of legal contract. 5 years ago, I established something called the Adrienne Davis Foundation. It's a charitable organization dedicated to ensuring that children never go hungry, and that elderly people who've spent their lives helping others are protected and honored in their later years. I stared at the document, seeing my name in official letterhead, feeling surreal and overwhelmed. "You created a foundation in my name?" "With the intention of finding you and asking your permission to use it," Malcolm said quickly. "If you had said no, I would have changed the name immediately. But Adrienne, this foundation has been funding meal programs in schools across Washington state for 5 years. We've fed over 10,000 children because of the inspiration you gave me as a hungry little boy." The weight of his words settled over me slowly. While I'd been struggling to pay bills and worrying about my children's futures, Malcolm had been feeding thousands of children in my honor. While my own children saw my charity as theft from their inheritance, this man had built an empire of kindness based on the simple act of buying school lunches. "I don't understand," I said softly. "What does this have to do with my situation now?" Malcolm's expression grew more serious. "The foundation has substantial assets, enough to ensure that you never have to worry about money again, and more importantly, enough to ensure that your children can never claim you're financially incompetent or unable to make sound decisions." He pulled out another document, this one covered in numbers. "I'm prepared to offer you a position as executive director of the foundation with an annual salary of $125,000. I nearly choked. "Malcolm, that's more money than I've ever made in my life." "It's less than you deserve," he said firmly. "But more importantly, it would give you financial independence and legal protection. As an actively employed executive director, no court would consider you mentally incompetent. Your children's plans would become impossible to execute." I felt dizzy, and it wasn't from the medication. But I don't know anything about running a foundation. I don't have the education or experience. "You have something more valuable than education," Malcolm interrupted gently. "You have the heart and instincts that this foundation was built to honor, and you'll have a full staff to handle the technical aspects. Your job would be to guide the mission, to help decide which programs to fund, to be the moral compass of an organization dedicated to kindness." The irony wasn't lost on me. My children wanted to take control of my life because they thought I was too generous, too willing to help others. Malcolm was offering me control of a foundation specifically designed to help others on a massive scale. There's more, Malcolm continued, pulling out another set of papers. I've also purchased a home for you, if you want it. You what? It's in Sunset Gardens, a private community about 20 minutes from here. Beautiful place, specifically designed for active adults who want independence but with available support services. The home is fully paid for. It would be yours, with no mortgage, no rent, no monthly housing costs. I felt like I was drowning in kindness after a lifetime of barely keeping my head above water. Malcolm, this is too much. I can't accept. You can, and you should, he said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone of someone who'd built a medical empire. Adrian, let me ask you something. When you paid for my lunches all those years ago, did you expect anything in return? Of course not. Then why is it so hard to believe that I want to help you without expecting anything in return? I didn't have an answer for that. Maybe because I'd spent so many years with people who always wanted something, I'd forgotten what unconditional kindness looked like. Malcolm pulled out a tablet and showed me photos of a charming single-story home with a wraparound porch and a garden that looked like something from a magazine. The house comes fully furnished, but you can change anything you want. There's a community center, walking trails, and optional meal services. You could move in as soon as you're released from the hospital. I studied the photos, trying to imagine myself in this beautiful place. It looked like a dream, the kind of peaceful retirement I'd never dared to hope for. What about my current apartment? We'd handle the move completely, pack everything you want to keep, donate what you don't need, handle all the logistics. Malcolm's voice grew softer. Adrian, I want you to understand something. This isn't charity. This is justice. You gave a hungry child hope and dignity. Now that child, grown up, wants to give you security and peace. I looked at the photos again, then at Malcolm's earnest face. And my children? What about them? They'll be furious. They'll think I've lost my mind, accepting help from a stranger. Malcolm's expression hardened slightly. With respect, Adrian, your children's opinion shouldn't matter in decisions about your own life, especially when their primary concern seems to be preserving their inheritance rather than ensuring your happiness. He was right, and I knew it. But letting go of a lifetime of putting my children's needs first wasn't easy, even after learning how little they valued me. Can I ask you something? I said. Anything. Why now? I mean, you've been looking for me for years. You could have approached me at any time. Why wait until I was in the hospital? Malcolm was quiet for a long moment, clearly choosing his words carefully. Because I needed to be sure you needed help. I've been watching from a distance for months, hoping your children would step up, hoping they would show the kindness you showed me. Today, when they abandoned you after surgery, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. He leaned forward slightly. And because, frankly, I was afraid you'd refuse help if you weren't in a position to see how alone you really are. The honesty of his answer hit me hard. He was right. If he'd approached me 6 months ago with this offer, I would have been too proud to accept it. I would have made excuses for my children's behavior and insisted I was fine on my own. There's one more thing, Malcolm said, pulling out a final document. This is entirely optional, but I wanted to present it as a possibility. The paper he handed me was a will. My will, already prepared with my name and information. I took the liberty of having my legal team draft this based on what I know about your current assets and wishes. Obviously, you can change anything or ignore it completely, but I thought it might be helpful to see your options laid out clearly. I read through the document, surprised by how thorough and thoughtful it was. Instead of leaving my modest assets to my children, this will establish a scholarship fund for underprivileged children, donated my house to a charity that helped single mothers, and left specific instructions for my care if I became unable to make decisions for myself. This gives my children nothing, I said, stating the obvious. That's correct. Given their apparent plan to have you declared incompetent in order to access your assets, This seemed like the most protective course of action. I set the will down and looked at Malcolm, this man who had appeared in my darkest hour like an answer to a prayer I hadn't even known I was praying. You've thought of everything, haven't you? I've tried to. Adrian, I want you to have choices. Real choices, not just the illusion of choice while other people control your life. He paused. But I need you to know that none of this comes with strings attached. If you want to reconcile with your children, if you want to leave them your inheritance, if you want to live modestly in your current apartment, I'll support whatever you decide. Even if you think I'm making a mistake. Even then, because that's what you did for me. You helped without trying to control the outcome. I leaned back against my pillows, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering. Financial security, a beautiful home, meaningful work, legal protection from my children's schemes. It was everything I'd never dared to dream of, offered by someone who owed me nothing but had chosen to remember everything. Malcolm, I said finally, what happens if I say yes to all of this and then my children try to fight it? Try to claim you're manipulating me or taking advantage of me? His smile was sharp and confident. Let them try. I own 4 hospitals, employ some of the best lawyers in the state, and have documented evidence of their own plans to manipulate you. More importantly, you'll be employed, housed, and surrounded by people who can testify to your mental competency and independence. He pulled out a business card and handed it to me. This is my personal attorney, Rebecca Martinez. She specializes in elder law and protection from financial exploitation. She's been briefed on your situation and is prepared to represent you immediately if needed. I took the card, feeling its weight as a symbol of protection I'd never had before. You really have thought of everything. I've had 15 years to think about it, Malcolm said simply. Adrian, I know this is a lot to process while you're recovering from surgery. You don't have to decide anything today. But I want you to know that these offers stand regardless of your timeline. A gentle knock at the door interrupted us. The same nurse from earlier peered in, looking apologetic. Mrs. Davis, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there are 3 people here who say they're your children. They'd like to see you. My heart rate monitor immediately started beeping faster. Malcolm noticed and placed a calming hand on my arm. It's your choice, he said quietly. You can see them, or you can ask them to come back tomorrow when you're feeling stronger. I looked at the documents spread across my bed, the foundation papers, the photos of my potential new home, the will that would protect everything I'd worked for from children who saw me as a problem to be managed. Then I looked at Malcolm, whose presence had transformed my worst day into a day of unexpected hope. Send them in, I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. It's time to see what they have to say. But as the nurse disappeared to get my children, I carefully gathered all of Malcolm's documents and handed them back to him. Can you hold on to these for now? Of course. He tucked everything back into his briefcase. Do you want me to leave? I considered this. Part of me wanted the protection of his presence, but another part needed to face my children alone, to see if I could detect any genuine remorse or concern in their behavior. Would you mind waiting just outside, in case I need you? Malcolm stood and straightened his suit jacket. I'll be right outside the door. If you need anything at all, just call my name. As he moved toward the door, I called out softly, Malcolm? He turned back. Thank you. For everything. For remembering. For caring. For giving me choices. His smile was gentle and warm. Thank you, Adrian, for teaching a hungry little boy that kindness exists in the world. Everything good in my life started with that lesson. As he stepped into the hallway, I could hear voices approaching. David's confident tone, Sarah's nervous laugh, Michael's attempt at humor. My children, coming to visit their mother after abandoning her to meet with lawyers about taking control of her life. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, feeling stronger than I had in years. It was time to see what they wanted this time. The sound of my children's voices grew louder as they approached my room. and I felt my heart rate spike in a way that had nothing to do with my recent surgery. Through the thin hospital walls, I could hear David talking in his usual authoritative tone, the one he'd inherited from his father and perfected in his accounting practice. "I still think we should have stayed this morning," Sarah was saying, her voice carrying that familiar note of anxiety. What if something had gone wrong? "Nothing went wrong," David replied curtly. "The procedure was routine. We verified that with the surgeon before we left." Michael's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Come on, Sarah. She's fine. She's always fine. Mom's like a cockroach. She'll survive anything." Their casual cruelty hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd heard worse on Malcolm's recording. But hearing it now, knowing they were about to walk into my room and pretend to care, made it somehow more painful. The door opened, and my 3 children filed in, David leading the way as he always did. He was wearing his best suit, the navy blue one he saved for important meetings, and his expression was set in what I'd come to recognize as his managing difficult client's face. Sarah followed behind him, clutching a small bouquet of supermarket flowers that looked like they'd been purchased from the hospital gift shop 5 minutes ago. Michael brought up the rear, already checking his phone as he walked. "Mom!" Sarah exclaimed with forced brightness, rushing to my bedside. "How are you feeling? We've been so worried." I studied her face, looking for any sign of genuine concern beneath the performance. Her makeup was perfect, her hair freshly styled. If she'd been worried enough to stay at the hospital, she'd certainly taken time to freshen up before returning. "I'm fine," I said quietly, accepting the flowers she thrust toward me. They were already wilting, probably had been sitting under the gift shop's fluorescent lights for days. "Thank you for these." David positioned himself at the foot of my bed, his hands clasped behind his back in a pose that screamed authority and control. "We spoke with Dr. Harrison before we came in. He said the surgery went perfectly. No complications." "That's what I understood too," I replied, watching his face carefully. There was something different about his expression, a tightness around his eyes that suggested he was calculating something. Michael finally looked up from his phone long enough to acknowledge my existence. "You look good, Mom. I mean, considering you just had heart surgery and all." "Thank you, Michael. That's very reassuring." If he caught the dryness in my tone, he didn't show it. He was already scrolling through his messages again, his attention span for family obligations apparently exhausted by that single observation. "So," David said, settling into the chair Malcolm had vacated, "we need to talk about a few things, practical things." Here it comes, I thought. The real reason for their visit. Sarah perched on the edge of the second chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "We've been thinking, Mom, and we're concerned about you living alone, especially after today." "What about today concerns you?" I asked, keeping my voice level. David leaned forward slightly. "Mom, you're 64 years old. You just had heart surgery. What if something happens when you're at home alone? What if you fall or have another episode?" "I have my life alert pendant," I said, "and my neighbors check on me." "Mrs. Henderson is 87 years old," Michael said without looking up from his phone. "What's she going to do if you have a medical emergency? Call 911 and then stand around wringing her hands?" Sarah shot him a warning look. "What Michael means is that we think you might be more comfortable somewhere with professional staff, people who are trained to handle medical situations." I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. They were already laying the groundwork, already starting the conversation that would lead to me being moved somewhere for my own good. "Are you talking about a nursing home?" I asked directly. "Not a nursing home," David said quickly. "More like an assisted living facility. Somewhere nice where you'd have your own apartment but with support services available." "I see." I looked from one face to another, these 3 people who shared my DNA but seemed like strangers. "And have you looked into any specific places?" Sarah's cheeks flushed slightly. "We've done some preliminary research, just to understand the options. There are some really lovely communities that specialize in active seniors. Active seniors who've just had heart surgery? I asked. Mom, don't be dramatic, David said, his patience already wearing thin. We're talking about your safety and well-being. As your children, we have a responsibility to make sure you're properly cared for. The word responsibility coming from his mouth was almost laughable. Where was their responsibility this morning when I woke up alone and terrified? Where was their responsibility during the past year when they'd barely called or visited? I appreciate your concern, I said carefully, but I'm not ready to give up my independence yet. Michael finally looked up from his phone, his expression suggesting I'd said something particularly stupid. Mom, independence is great when you're young and healthy, but you're not young anymore, and clearly your health is becoming an issue. My health is becoming an issue? I repeated. I had one blocked artery. It's been fixed. Dr. Harrison expects a full recovery. For now, David said ominously. But Mom, heart disease is progressive. This is just the beginning. You need to start thinking realistically about the future. I felt anger beginning to burn in my chest, hot and clean. What I need to think about is why my children are more concerned with managing my future than supporting me through my present. The room fell silent. Sarah's flowers rustled as she shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Michael's phone buzzed with a notification that he ignored for the first time since entering the room. David's jaw tightened, and I could see him struggling to maintain his professional composure. That's not fair, Mom, Sarah said finally. We're here now. We care about you. You're here now, I agreed. Where were you 4 hours ago when I woke up alone and crying? We explained that, David said stiffly. The parking situation. $20, I interrupted. The parking fee was $20 for the day. You left your mother alone after heart surgery to avoid paying $20. Michael's phone buzzed again, and this time he answered it. Sorry, I have to take this. It's a client. Os? He stepped out into the hallway, already deep in conversation about some sales deal that was apparently more important than his mother's recovery. David watched him go with obvious irritation, then turned back to me. Mom, you're clearly upset, and I understand that. Surgery is stressful, but you're not thinking clearly about the bigger picture. What bigger picture is that, David? Your finances, he said bluntly. Do you have any idea what this surgery is going to cost, even with Medicare? What ongoing cardiac care will cost? You can't afford to live independently and pay for the medical care you're going to need. There it was. The real concern. Not my health, not my happiness, but my money, and how my medical expenses might affect their inheritance. I see, I said quietly. And I suppose you have a solution for this financial problem? Sarah leaned forward eagerly. Actually, we do. If you were to move to an assisted living facility, you could sell your house. Use that money to pay for your care. It would probably last several years, maybe longer if you choose a more modestly priced community. And after that money runs out? David shrugged. Medicaid. The state takes over, but by then you'd be settled somewhere, established in a care routine. I stared at them both, marveling at how thoroughly they'd worked this out. Sell my house, spend down my assets, then become a ward of the state. All very neat and tidy, and coincidentally, it would eliminate any inheritance they might otherwise have to wait for. Have you spoken to anyone about this? I asked. Any professionals who could help navigate these decisions? David's eyes flickered almost imperceptibly. We've done some research. Consulted with people who understand elder care law. I see. Anyone specific I should know about? Sarah looked confused by the question, but David's expression grew more guarded. Just some preliminary consultations. Nothing formal. A soft knock at the door interrupted us. Malcolm stepped in, his presence immediately changing the energy in the room. He was still wearing his expensive suit, still carrying his leather briefcase, But now there was something different about his demeanor. More formal, more professional. "Excuse me," he said politely. "Mrs. Davis, I wanted to check on how you're feeling before I head home for the evening." David stood up immediately, his accountant instincts clearly picking up on Malcolm's obvious wealth and authority. "I'm sorry. Are you one of Mom's doctors?" Malcolm smiled, but it wasn't the warm smile he'd shared with me earlier. This was his business smile, polite but distant. "I'm Malcolm Chen. I own this hospital." The effect was immediate and dramatic. David's entire posture changed, his voice becoming obsequiously respectful. Sarah actually stood up, as if she were meeting royalty. Even Michael, who had wandered back into the room still holding his phone, suddenly looked interested. "Mr. Chen," David said, extending his hand. "David Davis, Adrienne's son. This is my sister Sarah and my brother Michael. We can't thank you enough for the excellent care our mother has received." Malcolm shook hands with each of them, his expression politely neutral. "Your mother received the same excellent care we provide all our patients, though I must say, she's a remarkable woman." "Oh yes," Sarah gushed. "Mom's always been special. We're so grateful she's in such good hands." I watched this performance with a mixture of disgust and fascination. These were the same children who'd left me alone after surgery, who'd spent the morning meeting with lawyers about having me declared incompetent. But put them in front of someone wealthy and powerful, and suddenly they were devoted, grateful children. "Mr. Chen," David said, his voice taking on what I recognized as his networking tone. "I don't suppose you have a few minutes to discuss our mother's situation. We're trying to make some decisions about her ongoing care." Malcolm's expression didn't change, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "What kind of decisions?" "Well, we're concerned about her living alone, given her age and now this health issue. We're looking into some assisted living options." "I see." Malcolm's voice was carefully neutral. "And what does Mrs. Davis think about these options?" David glanced at me, then back at Malcolm. "She's been resistant to the idea, but we think it's important to plan ahead. Be proactive, rather than reactive." "Proactive," Malcolm repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, I can see how that would be important." He paused, seeming to consider something. "You know, it's interesting. In my experience running healthcare facilities, I've found that the patients who do best are those who feel they have control over their care decisions." Sarah nodded eagerly. "Oh, absolutely. We want Mom to feel like she's part of the decision-making process." "Of course," Malcolm said smoothly. "Though I've also noticed that family members sometimes have different priorities than the patients themselves. It's understandable. Everyone wants what they think is best." There was something in his tone, a subtle sharpness that made David shift uncomfortably. "Well, yes. Sometimes elderly parents don't fully understand the complexities of their situation." Malcolm nodded slowly. "That can certainly happen. Though I've found that people tend to be more capable of making good decisions when they have complete information and appropriate support." He turned to me, and his expression warmed slightly. "Mrs. Davis, how are you feeling about your recovery? Do you feel confident about managing your care going forward?" I met his eyes, understanding that this was more than a casual question. "I'm feeling much stronger, actually. More confident than I have in a long time." "That's wonderful to hear." Malcolm turned back to my children. "Well, I should let you continue your visit. Mrs. Davis, please don't hesitate to call if you need anything at all. Anything." The emphasis on the last word wasn't lost on any of us. David's expression was puzzled, trying to understand why the hospital owner was taking such a personal interest in his mother. Sarah looked flustered, clearly intimidated by Malcolm's obvious authority. Michael was back to checking his phone. After Malcolm left, the room felt smaller somehow. David sat back down, but his earlier confidence had been shaken. "That was interesting," he said finally. "I wonder why the hospital owner would take such a personal interest in your case." I shrugged, keeping my expression neutral. Maybe he's just very hands-on with patient care. Maybe. But David's accountant mind was clearly working, trying to figure out what he'd missed. Sarah looked confused by the entire interaction. He seemed very nice, very successful. Very rich, Michael added, finally contributing something useful to the conversation. An idea was forming in my mind, growing stronger by the minute. I looked at my 3 children. David, with his calculating mind, already trying to figure out how to leverage this new connection. Sarah, with her perpetual anxiety about money and status. Michael, with his complete indifference to everything except his own immediate gratification. You know, I said slowly, maybe you're right about planning ahead. All 3 of them turned to look at me with renewed attention. I should probably think more seriously about my future, I continued. Make some changes while I'm still healthy enough to make good decisions. David leaned forward, sensing victory. That's exactly what we've been trying to tell you, Mom. Yes, I said thoughtfully. I should definitely make some changes. But the changes I was thinking about weren't the ones they were hoping for. 6 months later, I stood on the wraparound porch of my new home in Sunset Gardens, watching the morning mist lift off the community's central lake. The house that Malcolm had shown me in photographs was even more beautiful in reality. Warm hardwood floors, windows that filled every room with natural light, and a kitchen where I'd learned to cook for pleasure rather than necessity. The transition had been smoother than I'd ever imagined possible. Within a week of my hospital stay, Malcolm's team had handled every detail of my move. My old apartment had been professionally packed, with items I wanted to keep delivered to my new home and everything else donated to local charities. My children had been told I was moving to a senior community for health reasons, which was true enough that they hadn't questioned it. What they didn't know was that instead of the modest assisted living facility they'd been researching, I was living in what amounted to a luxury retirement resort, with my housing completely paid for, and a 6-figure salary from the Adrian Davis Foundation, ensuring I'd never worry about money again. I took a sip of my morning coffee. Real coffee, expensive coffee, not the generic brand I'd been buying for years, and opened the letter that had arrived yesterday. It was from David, written in his precise accountant's handwriting. Dear Mom, it read, I hope you're settling in well at your new place. We haven't heard from you much since you moved, and we're concerned. Sarah tried calling last week but got your voicemail. We'd like to visit soon to see how you're doing and make sure you have everything you need. Also, we should probably discuss your financial arrangements. I'm worried about how you're managing the costs of your new living situation on your fixed income. Please call me when you get this. Love, David. I set the letter down next to my morning newspaper, the Seattle Times, delivered to my door every day along with the Wall Street Journal and the local community newsletter. David's concern about my finances was touching, in a way. He had no idea that my fixed income had increased by roughly 10 times since I'd last seen him. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Malcolm's name appeared on the caller ID, and I answered with a smile. Good morning, Malcolm. Good morning, Adrian. How are you feeling today? Wonderful, I said, and meant it. I just finished reviewing the applications for our new school lunch program in Tacoma. I think we should fund all 3 schools that applied, even the one with the questionable financial management. I laughed. Especially that one. Sometimes the places that look the messiest on paper are where the need is greatest. I learned that from a very wise little boy who taught me that hunger doesn't wait for perfect circumstances. Malcolm's chuckle was warm. I'll never get used to you throwing my own words back at me. All right, all 3 schools it is. Anything else on your agenda today? I'm meeting with the architect this afternoon about the new community center, and I have a conference call with the Portland Foundation office at 3. Oh, and I need to review the scholarship applications for next semester. It still amazed me sometimes how full my days had become. For years, my biggest decisions had been which bills to pay first and whether I could afford to replace my worn-out shoes. Now, I was making decisions about programs that would feed thousands of children and send dozens to college. "You sound busy," Malcolm said. "Good busy or overwhelming busy?" "The best kind of busy," I assured him. "The kind where you go to bed tired but satisfied." "I'm glad to hear it. Oh, before I forget, there's something I wanted to tell you. I had an interesting conversation yesterday." "Oh?" "Someone contacted my office asking questions about you, specifically about your employment with the foundation." My stomach tightened slightly. "What kind of questions?" "Professional questions. Someone wanting to verify your position, your salary, your mental competency to handle your responsibilities." I closed my eyes, already knowing the answer. David. That would be my guess. My assistant handled it very professionally. Confirmed that you're an active, full-time employee in excellent standing, with no concerns about your performance or decision-making abilities. How did David even know to call your office? Probably the same way he found out about your increased bank deposits. He's been monitoring your finances, remember? That was true. David had set up my online banking, which meant he probably still had access to my accounts. He would have seen the foundation's salary deposits and wondered where they were coming from. "What happens now?" I asked. "Nothing happens. You're employed by a legitimate charitable organization. You're living independently and managing your own affairs. There's nothing anyone can do to challenge that." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. For months, I'd been waiting for the other shoe to drop, for my children to figure out what was really happening and try to intervene somehow. But Malcolm was right. What could they do? I was healthier and more financially secure than I'd been in years. "Actually," Malcolm continued, "there is one more thing. I got a call from an elder law attorney yesterday, someone named Patricia Henley." My breath caught. That was the attorney who'd refused to help David with his original plan to have me declared incompetent. She wanted me to know that the same client who'd consulted with her 6 months ago has been making calls to other lawyers in the area, asking more specific questions about challenging financial decisions made by elderly parents. More specific how? Questions about whether large salary increases could be considered evidence of manipulation or coercion. Whether new employment arrangements might be seen as someone taking advantage of an elderly person. I felt anger beginning to burn in my chest. Even now, even after I'd found happiness and security and meaningful work, David couldn't just let me be. He couldn't accept that I might have made decisions he didn't approve of. "Malcolm," I said slowly, "is there anything they can actually do? Legally?" "Not a thing," he said firmly. "You're clearly competent. You're living independently. You're managing complex professional responsibilities. Any attorney worth their degree would laugh them out of their office. But they're still trying. They're fishing, looking for leverage they don't have and won't find." I set my coffee cup down and looked out over the lake, where a family of ducks was making their morning rounds. The mother duck led the way, her ducklings following in a neat line behind her. Simple trust, simple love, simple care for the young. "You know what's funny?" I said. "For months I've been expecting to feel guilty about cutting them off financially, waiting for the maternal instinct to kick in and make me want to help them again. And it hasn't happened. I feel free. For the first time in my adult life, I'm not responsible for anyone else's problems or mistakes or poor choices." "How does that feel?" "Terrifying," I said honestly, "and wonderful." Malcolm was quiet for a moment. "Adrienne, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever regret it? The way things ended with them?" I thought about that for a long time before answering. "I regret that it had to end. I regret that they never saw me as anything more than a source of money and support. I regret that I spent so many years making excuses for their selfishness." I paused. "But I don't regret choosing myself for once." "Good," Malcolm said simply. "Because you deserve to be chosen. You deserve to be chosen 40 years ago, and you deserve it now." After we hung up, I sat on my porch for a while longer, thinking about the journey that had brought me to this place. A heart attack had led to surgery, which had led to abandonment, which had led to the most unexpected reunion of my life. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, I thought it might be one of my children, finally reaching out to actually see how I was doing rather than to investigate my finances. But the number was unfamiliar. "Mrs. Davis, this is Jennifer Chen, Malcolm's daughter. I'm a sophomore at University of Washington, and I'm writing a paper about charitable organizations for my sociology class. Dad told me about the foundation and suggested I interview you about its impact on local communities. Would you be available to meet sometime this week? Thank you, Jenny." I smiled, delighted by the idea of meeting Malcolm's daughter and sharing the story of how a simple act of kindness had grown into something that was now feeding thousands of children and sending hundreds to college. I typed back quickly, "I would love to meet with you, Jenny. How about lunch on Thursday? There's a lovely cafe here in Sunset Gardens that I think you'd enjoy." Her response came back almost immediately. "Perfect. I can't wait to hear the stories Dad says you have about helping kids who need it most." As I put my phone away, I realized something that filled me with quiet joy. I was building new relationships now. Relationships based on mutual respect and shared values rather than obligation and guilt. Malcolm had become not just a benefactor, but a true friend. Jenny would be the first of the next generation I'd have the chance to influence, not through financial support, but through the wisdom that came from finally understanding my own worth. That afternoon, I had lunch with Mrs. Patterson, my next-door neighbor who'd become one of my closest friends. She was 82, sharp as a tack, and had raised 5 children largely on her own after her husband died young. "You know what I love about this place?" she said, cutting into her salmon with precise movements. "Everyone here chose to be here. We're not here because our children couldn't be bothered with us, or because we ran out of money, or because we had no other choice." "What do you mean?" "I mean we're here because we decided we deserve to live somewhere beautiful, with people who appreciate us. We're here because we finally figured out that we matter." Her words resonated deeply. That was exactly how I felt, like I mattered. Not as a source of financial support, not as someone who existed to make other people's lives easier, but as a person with my own value and worth. "Mrs. Patterson," I said, "can I ask you something personal?" "Honey, at my age, everything's personal. Ask away." "Do you ever miss your old life? Even the difficult parts?" She considered this, sipping her iced tea thoughtfully. "I miss the version of my children I thought I had. Took me years to realize that the children I thought I'd raised and the children I actually raised were 2 different things." "How do you tell the difference?" "Easy," she said with a smile that held decades of hard-won wisdom. "The children you think you raised would move heaven and earth to make sure you're happy and safe. The children you actually raised only show up when they need something." That evening, I sat in my beautiful living room, surrounded by my favorite books and the art I'd finally had the courage to buy for myself. On my coffee table sat Malcolm's old lunch card, which he'd given me as a keepsake, now framed and displayed as a reminder of how far kindness can travel across time. I opened my laptop and began typing. "Dear David, Sarah, and Michael, thank you for your letter and your concern about my well-being. I want you to know that I am happier and healthier than I have been in years. My new home is beautiful, my financial situation is secure, and I have meaningful work that brings me joy every day. I understand that my choices may not be what you expected or wanted for me, but they are my choices to make. I am not in need of assistance, financial or otherwise, and I am not in danger of being taken advantage of by anyone. I wish you all happiness and success in your own lives. With love, Mom P.S. I have enclosed information about the Adrian Davis Foundation, in case you're interested in learning about the work I do. We're always looking for volunteers if any of you ever decide you'd like to help feed hungry children." I printed the letter, signed it carefully, and sealed it in an envelope along with a brochure about the Foundation's programs. Tomorrow I would mail it, and then I would be done explaining myself to people who had never bothered to try to understand me. As I prepared for bed that night, I stood in front of my bedroom window looking out over the gardens that gave this community its name. Somewhere in this peaceful place were dozens of other people who had discovered, late in life, what it felt like to be valued for who they were, rather than what they could provide. I thought about the little boy Malcolm had been, hungry and alone, and how feeding him had fed something in me too, a sense of purpose that had taken decades to fully bloom. I thought about all the children who would benefit from the Foundation's programs, and all the college students who would get scholarships funded by the money I'd once spent enabling my own children's poor choices. Most of all, I thought about the woman I'd become at 64, independent, respected, financially secure, and surrounded by people who valued my mind rather than my wallet. It had taken a heart attack to save my heart, and for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I belonged. 6 months ago, I had awakened from surgery to find myself abandoned by the people I'd sacrificed everything for. Tonight, I was falling asleep in a home filled with the warmth of genuine friendship and the satisfaction of work that mattered. The echo of kindness, it turned out, had a very long reach indeed. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it circles back to save you too. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.